Hi again, everybody. I'm Jamie Allison, and this is the Big Idea, Big Moves podcast. This is the destination for high performers. We talk to people from different genres, different niches, just people doing really interesting things in their space, find out a little bit about their journeys and what they're doing, and see if we can apply them in our own lives as well. So we talk to lots of athletes, we talk to entrepreneurs, CEOs, we've talked to an astronaut. So lots of really interesting people that, again, we can hear a bit about their lives and see if we can translate them into what we do as well. I have a couple of guests today that I know is going to take us on that path as well. Just before we jump into that, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know we have a relationship with Epitome Sportswear, and a couple of different reasons why that's really important to us is that they have high performance gear, but they also have just stuff that if you're wanting to be able to go to the hockey arena, if you want to be able to go watch your child's soccer game, all of those things, just stuff for everyday life, they have that as well. And they really kind of push the whole living life fully kind of message, which is really cool. The one other thing that is really important to us as well is that they give back to the community that they serve as well. And they're working to impact the inequities in opportunity for girls and women in sport. And for that reason, a portion of their profits go directly to organizations and initiatives that support girls in sports. So definitely take a look at it. You can go through our Instagram profile and you'll see that in there. And I think there's a discount code in there as well. Or just go directly to Epitome Sportswear. That's EPITOME sportswear.com. And today, really, excited in a couple of different ways to have a really inspiring athletes and coaches with us today. So Jessica O'Connell and Faye Stenning, they're co-founders of Grit Athletic Coaching. Jessica is a decorated runner, Canadian Olympian, and an exercise physiologist. And Faye was a pro obstacle course racer, podium finisher at the Spartan World Championships, all-Canadian cross-country athlete, and is a strength specialist as well. So really interesting stuff. I'm sure both of you have been super busy lately, and maybe first of all, just welcome and thanks for taking the time today with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Maybe the first way to start, before we get into Grit and kind of what you're doing there, it'd be interesting, I think, for everyone to know, because you have been in related sports, but obviously some slightly different specializations. And maybe how did and whoever wants to talk about it to start with, it's just how did you kind of find each other and realize this was something that you wanted to do together? Because you aren't even in the same locations right now too, which is kind of cool. So anyone want to jump in to take that first?
Sure. I'll start off by saying, like, yeah. Jessica and I, like, I'm in New York right now. She's in Calgary, but we grew up together in Calgary. We went to high school together. There's a big, long story, and Jessica and I have told the story on lots of podcasts, and it's much too long of a story to kind of go into. But, I was a runner, I guess, before Jessica. Yeah. I always love to share this story because I was the superstar, like one of the best runners in Canada until Jessica came along. So that's kind of how that relationship started. It was like, I was doing very well in athletics through high school, had some records, scholarships to the States, was actually hoping to go to the 2008 Olympics. Yeah. And just that was kind of a goal. And this little young Jessica, well, I say little, even though she's the same age as me, she's 5'1" or something, Jess.
5'2", Faye, 5'2", come on.
Oh, super tall then. Okay.
She showed up literally out of nowhere. And I was like, I guess our coaches had suggested that we go on some run together. And I was like, why would I run? And this is very sexist of me, but I'm going to say it. I was like, why would I run with a girl? I was always running with the boys. Yeah. And so then I was like, this chick's like not going to keep up with me. Anyway, I agreed to go on the run with her. And ever since I specifically remember that run, I was like, okay, I'm in trouble. I am about to be dethroned. I am no longer the best runner, at the time it was pretty much the country for my age group. Yeah. This girl is showing up and she just tore it apart. And it wasn't long, obviously setbacks after setbacks after setbacks, as a lot of people know, to be at the top of anything. stuff goes wrong, but
Yeah.
eventually, yeah, she did end up making that Olympic team in 2016. So, but yeah, it started as a bit. I don't think it was ever a rivalry because she just showed up and just conquered right away. And but we grew this friendship because I think we both really respected each other because we were both at that age where, you know, for me at least, I was could get into a lot of the party scene and kind of go off this path. And it was this friend that I had that was we were working together for these common goals that was at the time for both of us really making an Olympic team. So that's kind of how our relationship started, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it started with a friendship, which was great. We were training partners. We did a ton of our like easy sessions together, some of our harder ones as well. And we were great friends. We hung out all the time.
Yeah.
And once we graduated university, our sport journeys diverged a little bit more. Faye kind of left the pure running scene and dove more into obstacle course racing and personal training and the strength realm of things, whereas I stayed very much in running. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't train together. So we still did. We remained great friends. That training wasn't the only thing we had in common. We also just genuinely enjoyed each other's company.
Yeah.
And the further Faye got into obstacle course racing, the further she noticed that there seemed to be a gap in the training world for qualified, like dare I say, intelligent coaches offering like high quality training. It was a relatively new sport at the time, and there was a lot of people just kind of guessing and figuring things out. And we saw like a gap both in obstacle course racing and in run coaching where people weren't getting good quality endurance and strength coaching.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that I find interesting because we've had lots of obstacle course racers on, and like from Lindsay and Ryan to, you know, lots of kind of, Chris Rokolowski and things like that. And actually, that would be a bit of a question too, is that you've obviously seen that and kind of filled a bit of a gap there. Do you see that? Because now there's high rocks, there's other things that are even kind of evolving around that. Has that changed a lot as to kind of, you know, how people are approaching these things? Because I think, you know, things like Spartan and stuff like that early on was pretty the elite group was a smaller group. Now it seems like there's a much larger group that's doing something that's a bit of a merger of kind of that Spartan and now High Rocks has become a very large thing, things like that. Is that something that your athletes are kind of coming to in different ways now because of that?
I think anytime there's a new sport, there's an element of guessing on how to train for it. And I think it's important to not confuse general progression with like high quality training. Like people can be very successful doing wacky things to start, not knowing how successful they could be with better training. Like that's somewhat relative. And yeah, it's a much more popular sport now and people seem to be better, but I think people have kind of figured out how to train for it a lot better in the last couple of years. And it's also just reaching more people. It was a very elite small group to start, but it was also a newer sport. So that's sort of the natural life cycle of a sport, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that like the difference between how Jessica and I sort of would approach coaching as to some other coaches who perhaps don't have a background in exercise science. Jessica and I both went to school for that. So we have it drilled in our head that although some of these events, like maybe wall balls are kind of wacky, or the monkey bars are kind of like a wacky thing to do. When you really break down the movement, we really have these like exercise and human physiological principles that still really apply to some of these events, obstacles, whatever. So we're kind of always, you know, people sometimes they get too involved in like the tiny details, but when you really break it back and look at what are actually the physical requirements needed and how does our body work and how do energy systems work, we're able to kind of coach in a way and sort of make more of a tested and science-driven approach to these wacky races. And a lot of that also comes back from our background as both being high-level runners, is we've been put through those programs. It's not just what you learn in school. We all know that you have to put it into practice, and we've been coached by also ourselves by some very, very, very great coaches. So we've learned a lot from them.
Yeah, it's kind of like reverse engineering a big project every time a new sport comes out.
Yeah. And Jessica, I guess that would be one question, is that, obviously, being an Olympian, how does that impact what you're able to translate back into? Because that experience would be something, but because obviously there's a big mental component to that as well. But from a physiology standpoint and all of those things, how has that been able to translate back into when you're talking to people that maybe aren't necessarily aspiring to be an Olympian, but that depth of what you do and have experienced yourself, does that help you from a coaching perspective to be able to translate that into your clients as well?
I'd say so, for sure, because anytime you've experienced something yourself, then you can speak to it more authentically. I don't think it's a necessary prerequisite to be an Olympian. Like my coach, I don't think ever competed in track and field, really. My personal coach that brought me to the Olympics, but the ability to speak authentically about pressure or injury recovery or travel or anything that's related to the athlete experience, I think is very, very valuable. Like I really enjoy pre-race chats with athletes and try and pump them up and just kind of pass forward all the information that I've gained that I didn't even realize I was gaining through experience.
Yeah, yeah, and Faye, similar question is that you've been in lots of intense things yourself. If you've been in world championships and doing kind of Spartans and things like that, there's probably those points where mental resiliency becomes an absolute part of what you do. How do you kind of connect that in with your clients, and how do you approach that? Is that just something that kind of connects easily through, once you start kind of looking at the training and how they do that? How do you bring in resilience? Is it something that can be taught? Is it something that just innately comes, through what you do? What's your approach there?
Yeah, yeah. I also want to bring back kind of the question you asked Jessica, because one piece that I see that Jessica and I both bring into our coaching, and I like how Jessica said, like, don't need to be Olympian to be a coach, but what the important piece there is Jessica achieved something high level. So it doesn't matter whether, even if you're the CEO of a company or an entrepreneur, or you've done anything in your life, if you went after a goal and kind of achieve that goal and Jessica beat out pretty much everyone in the world except for a few Kenyans and Ethiopians, to make an exaggeration. But I'm just saying, if you really dive into being excellent at something, you can relate that. We can relate that to our athletes. We can relate that to entrepreneurs. Like, those skills are very transferable. So I think that, I would say that the people that we coach have already come to us. They have signed up for these races. They have that natural drive and that ambition. A lot of them aren't just successful in their fitness and sport worlds. They're also, they're also a New York Times journalist, and they're also like very successful people outside of their lives. So we're not, yes, sometimes they're a little bit more unmotivated than they should be, and then we kind of gotta remind them of their goals and their why and why they're here. But I wouldn't say that a huge part of our job as coaches is to motivate the people that we're working with. Now, I come from a background where I coached corporate Calgary. So I coached people that were told by their doctor to be in the gym because they're going to have a heart attack. Now, that's a whole different level of instilling motivation and finding their why and being a bit more of a hard ass with that type of clientele. But the people that we're working with, and I'm assuming a lot of the people that are listening, yes, of course it's trainable, but I think they're type A people. They've got it in there. We're just trying to sort of finesse the art of coaching and what needs to be prioritized and what doesn't, and moving the pieces of the puzzle so it fits their goals, and so that they are successful at whatever they try and do from an exercise and sports perspective.
Kind of maximizing what's already there. You're not necessarily having to get their drive. It's how do you maximize that within probably a pretty full life for some of these people because of those things, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly. And one thing that I didn't really, realize until like, you know, becoming a mom and having other things going on my life, even just having a business and all this stuff, is there's seasons for everything. So a lot of times we're telling our coaches, like, this might be the season that you're kind of not that crazy fit person you were 3 months ago. Maybe this is the season where you're focusing a bit more on your career, or maybe you're not, you know, doing every single extra project on your career, and you're taking a step aside and focusing on your family because they need you more at this certain time. So looking at your life as just different seasons of where you're prioritizing everything doesn't need to be the same year round, because we all have different, like, priorities shift as, you know, as people have
As life happens.
life, they got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and Jessica, going along with that, how do you approach, I mean, goal setting from that standpoint? Because obviously that's something that I'm sure you work with all those clients, and it can be different depending on their life situations. But how do you do that, where you would have an approach around measuring off the different parts of life? So you obviously, it's probably pretty simple to sit down with somebody and say, what's your athletic goal in this period of time? But I'm assuming that you probably do that, as well as how do we fit that in with kind of what happens in your life? How do you approach goal setting? How do you do it yourself? And does that translate the same way to your clients as well? Because, both of you, I'm sure, you have your own health and wellness, and you probably have lots of entrepreneurial goals, and then just what happens outside with life too. So how do you approach it? And then does that translate the same way into how you approach it with clients?
Yeah, totally. I completely echo what Faye says, that entrepreneurship and sport, wildly similar.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah,
it's time in, it's setting goals, it's trying to have a vision and work towards it. Um, so on a personal level, and something that we try and instill in our clients, is trying to keep goals objective, but also process oriented. So most athletes, and one thing I absolutely love with our business is that we work with the vast majority, if not all of our athletes, like one-on-one. So
yeah,
these conversations are like very unique to each individual. Every single person is a project, which keeps it very fun.
yeah,
But typically people will come to us and they'll say, I want to place this, or I want to run this time in a race. And so first off the bat, it's my job to figure out, okay, is this realistic? Like, is
yeah,
this in the realm of possibilities? And if not, how do I gently deliver that? Maybe that's more in the like 2, 3, 4, 5 year plan.
yeah,
And objective goals are great because they come very intuitively to people. They're a really good like guiding star. They're easy to explain to your support system around you. I want to qualify for the Boston Marathon. I podium in my age group in my next race. Like, those are very tangible. But a big thing that we also work towards with our clients and with myself is making sure that there's some element of process-oriented goals as well, meaning the little steps that you're going to take along the way to get that objective goal once we've determined that it's realistic. So things like getting all your training in, being honest about your schedule so that we can create it and figure out how all of this is going to work. That doesn't really sound like a goal, but it is. It's the goal is to be realistic with your constraints.
yeah,
To foam roll every day, to stretch, to fuel properly in your long run. Like, all of these are little steps that are very much within your control, because
yeah,
a big conversation we have with our athletes is what sort of goal is within your control, therefore you can achieve, and what sort of goal still very meaningful and very impactful, but isn't entirely in your control. Winning a race, not in your control in its
right.
entirety. So really educating around the different types of goals and helping our athletes to create something that's meaningful and very motivating.
Yeah, yeah. And Faye, anything you'd add with that? I mean, one thing you mentioned that, you're a mom and things like that. Those are things that you have to be able to kind of figure out how you change your goals to address the things in your life and the different seasons you were talking about. Anything you'd add to that?
As any parent knows, like, it's obviously a life-changing thing, and it's totally changed my perspective. It's weird. I think what it changes is, I think people forget whether you are whether you're slaving away in your early years as an investment banker, whether you're the CEO of a big company, or whether you're like whatever you're doing in your life. We sometimes think that taking time away to exercise and work on is selfish. And it's like, oh, you have time to work out. Like, I hear that all the day. Oh, must be nice to go to the gym. It must be nice to have time to go I will actually share this, and hopefully my husband doesn't listen to this podcast, but my alarm went off today. I was already up working, but my alarm buzzed off. It was my alarm to remind myself to get out and go do a loop of Central Park. And so I'm getting ready to go, and my husband goes, "Oh, what are you doing? You're going to go to a coffee shop to work?" And I said, "No, I'm going to run." And he said something along the lines like, "Oh, like almost like it must be nice to have time to run."
Yep. Yep.
And he's like, "Well, I don't go to the gym or something like that because I prioritize you and Colt, our son." And I looked at him and I said, "Exercise is a part of my value system, and I'm going and running." Like, and like, I think that a lot of people would be like, "Oh, you're right. Like, I'm taking this time away from like you and my son and my work to go do this thing." But we forget that this is a basic requirement of life. It's just like needing food. It's just like needing water. It's just like needing social support. It's called exercise, and it needs to get done, because at the end of the day, fast forward 30 years from now, I might be the one taking care of my son because maybe my husband has a heart condition because he didn't do any cardiovascular exercise. And that's like an exaggeration, but it's so true. And people just forget that. So I think that the one thing I just want to like say is you need to carve this time out for yourself, because it is a must. We're in a huge, we've had for several decades a huge obesity epidemic. We have a lot of chronic diseases that it has been scientifically proven if you partake in exercise regularly, we can combat that. And people forget that because we're training for sports, or it's selfish because we actually end up making a hobby out of the fitness activity. And so it's looked at by the eyes of other people as, "Oh, must be nice, must be nice." But no, we're just doing what we need to do to stay healthy. So I think it's important to remember that.
And to stay sane. Like, it's an investment in yourself. If it takes you, I don't know how long it took you to Central Park this morning, we'll call it 45 minutes. And then you can be a 10 out of 10 human instead of a shadow of yourself, because you're not getting something that helps you to sustain yourself. Then like that's an investment that pays dividends.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's a mental health connection as well. I mean, it's overall wellness. It's not just the run, it's what comes with the run and all of those things as well. And actually, the other part that we haven't touched on much there is just your approach to, and again, I'm sure this depends a lot on the athlete and what their discipline is and all of those things. But how do you approach the nutrition part of it? Because obviously you have you really have a quite a scientific approach to all of those things. So are you do you really get behind looking at macros and doing it in that detail? How do you approach that with athletes that are high level athletes that you're dealing with?
Yeah, so since we like to do things right, I'm a clinical exercise physiologist. That's what my certification title is. And within my scope of practice is talking about general sports nutrition. So we have lots and lots of conversations on fueling during workouts, what to eat before, what to eat after, how to hydrate, how many grams of carbs would be a good goal to hit during a long run or during prep for a marathon or a long Spartan race, that sort of thing. So fundamental sports nutrition that is not general necessarily, certainly pertinent to the individual who's asking, but we don't get into the nitty-gritty of like, you should eat X grams of each macro, because that's not in the scope of practice of an exercise physiologist, and it's not in the scope of practice of most gym people. And that's something that drives us absolutely nuts, because I think a lot of people who call themselves nutritionists are very much working outside of what they're qualified to do. Registered dietitians go to a lot of school to be able to do that. They have a degree, they have advanced certifications, they have a lot of practice behind them, and a lot of people are giving out advice without that education or those qualifications. And so we always refer our clients who have like very dialed nutrition questions or want very specific guidance to someone who's truly qualified.
Yeah, and really, I mean, I think that's important, that a lot of people try to kind of package the things together, and often package in a way that is pretty canned, I guess, and not as specific to the athlete, but also just generally it makes sense. It's more of a medical approach to it, where you would have more of what are your specializations and what's the team that's kind of looking at those things as well. So makes a lot of sense, especially if you truly are looking at it from what should happen, I guess. I'm going to go over to the entrepreneurial side of what you do a little bit, because you know, you've built up you know, a real practice, but also all of the things that go with that, which may not have been, like, even if you are athletes and you you know, you have the scientific training and all of those things. Being an entrepreneur, it's what drives you is probably very similar, but there's a lot of stuff you have to learn as well. So maybe I'll kind of throw that out there. What's that been like for you? And like, has there been something that jumped out as, wow, that's been a lot more difficult to do than I thought it was going to be? Or like, was there anything that's a real surprise so far?
Yeah. Oh God, how much time do you have?
Yeah. Because I mean, your A-type personality made you learn it, I'm sure, but it's like it's a lot to learn right away.
Yeah, I think for me, I think what's been super challenging, because I'm kind of like a black and white person. Like, I like things by the textbook. I like science. I'm not into the arts. Like, I'm that type of person.
Yeah.
I find the marketing piece like super frustrating, because I can't be able to like draw a line about like what works and what doesn't. And I can't put things into boxes, which I love to do. Doesn't work, does work. It's just like this cloudy. So that's been like the most frustrating like part of my life, outside of my son not sleeping, I'll say.
Yeah.
That's true. And
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
For me, it's been just being a little bit overwhelmed with what, like, the further I get in learning what I don't know, I guess. Like, when we started this business, I thought, okay, we need a website. Go on YouTube. How do you make a website? I made a website. Okay. Seems like we need some sort of marketing strategy. How do you use Instagram? Okay, make a whole bunch of posts. Maybe it'll work. And I've been very lucky through the Canadian Olympic Committee. They have a partnership with the Queen's Smith School of Business. And so I've taken some business courses through them. I've taken a couple like marketing, organizational behavior, business 101, that sort of thing, to give us a bit of a foundation. But it's really almost just opened the Pandora's box of how much more there is. Like, we're both trained in exercise physiology, and there's not, I think I took one business class in university because my school was smart enough to recognize that many kinesiologists go on to be entrepreneurs. But I mean, writing a business plan is very different than actually executing something. So it's been a lot of trial and error. It's been a lot of, okay, how do we, just like in sport, there's a problem. I was injured a lot through my athletic career, and I'd always try and find creative ways for cross training. Okay, I can't run. How the heck am I going to make this work? Especially through COVID. Okay, I can't go to literally any facility. How the heck am I going to still train? How am I going to, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And so it's been a lot of that with the business as well. Okay, we have this gap, we have this flaw where we seem to not be, I don't know, getting the same traction on Google, or our Instagram stats have slightly changed. Okay, what do we do? How do we fill that gap? So YouTube has been very helpful.
The school of Google and
you
YouTube. and if you get to using like ChatGPT and stuff too, that a lot of people are starting to use some of those things to do something
that
very
didn't
similar.
exist when we started. So that's a whole other frontier where we're now like, okay, now we need to learn to use this tool that's probably going to be very, very powerful. And like, what even is it? What is it? It's the first piece of tech that's made me feel old and disconnected.
It's, and it changes so fast. Actually, that the other side of that is during COVID, which a lot of places, you know, had to muddle their way through to do some of these things. But one thing I'm wondering if that's been a positive for you, where a lot of that kind of personal training connection and doing some of those coaching pieces, you know, before COVID, there was a lot more feeling you had to be face to face to do a lot of this stuff. And like, has that been a positive impact, I guess, for what you do now, that people are a lot more comfortable, I think, being able to know that they can talk to both of you in different locations and be able to really put something together that, and have access to an expertise that they might not have in the past?
Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Go for it.
No, I mean, we were always kind of online. So I think that, I don't know if I noticed too much that it affected us too much, because we were always online. So the people that were our clients and before and after COVID always sort of knew that there was this, that we didn't offer in person a thing. So I would say it hasn't really too much impacted us. I don't know.
Oh no, Faye, it had a huge impact. We were so lucky because since we were already online,
Yeah,
COVID was so
yeah,
long ago
that's
that
the
like
impact, is you were already doing it. I
we were
think it
already
probably,
doing
people
it. And
felt
so we
comfortable
grew
going to you.
massively through COVID.
Yeah.
Because it was suddenly accepted. And we also had more time because we weren't, you know, we were kind of stuck in our houses for a bit. So we could grow our marketing, grow kind of the structure of the business.
Yeah.
But since we were already there, like day one, when people were like, oh crap, like I need some structure, like it was already established. So that helped us a ton.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. Now I'm kind of thinking about our numbers, and we did have that bump up, and that's probably the variable that caused it.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and in knowing, I've talked to a lot of other people that it was the opposite problem, where they weren't online and had to struggle for a while trying to figure out how they took those things that were offline and move it into online and make it feel comfortable for people where they didn't have that. So you probably had, I guess, less learning curve for both yourself and all of your clients as well. It felt like, okay, this is just normal and it happens to
Yeah,
be okay because nobody is going anywhere right now. So
right.
yeah,
Totally.
so
We got lucky without realizing it. The reason why we started our business online is because we were both still competing. So we were traveling everywhere.
yeah,
We had very erratic schedules, and the idea of consistently showing up for people in real life, not possible. Like that just didn't work. We didn't want that. And so it was really great because once showing up in person was not an option, like it gave us a focus during a time when like you couldn't do that anyway. And so the timing was really great.
yeah, yeah.
If
And
a pandemic had to happen, we got lucky.
yeah, yeah, that's right. It probably would have been great if it didn't, but hey,
That would have been plan A, but it's
that's
okay to find a silver lining sometimes, I suppose.
absolutely, absolutely. And how about mentors, whether it's mentors from a business standpoint, but also from an athletic standpoint? Like, have there been people that stand out as like, have you taken little bits away from a bunch of different people, or do you have a couple of people that, oh, I go to them often and they're the ones that have kind of really helped me through this? Is there, how does that work for both of you? And maybe I'll start, Faye, from your end. Like, has there been a couple of people that are pivotal for you?
Yeah, so for me, like I find I have a lot of one-on-one time with various people here in New York, mostly through running. So I run with like someone different, like pretty much sometimes like 7 days a week, different person. And everyone, it depends how I guess it depends how you define success. But in my world, most of my friends are quote unquote successful. And yeah, I use that time. And I think we both use that time to bounce ideas off each other. Or just mostly talk about the struggles that we're going through in our lives. And a lot of times people have been through the same thing and they share stuff that worked and didn't. So I don't go to one specific mentor. I kind of look at my peers and just like through like catching up with them, I end up like learning a lot from them. So that's kind of how I go
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. What about you, Jessica?
Yeah, similar, like you gain a little bit from this person, a little bit from that person, but my sister is actually the CEO of a small like green energy, well, they measure methane emissions, a company
Yeah,
called Aerolytics. So
yeah.
they create software for companies that need to monitor their methane emissions.
Oh,
And so she's been through the startup hustle, she's still in it, and lots of pitches, lots of grant writing and managing a huge team and stuff like that. And that's very much bigger scale than just Faye and I for sure,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's really cool to see what that side of entrepreneurship is like. And then like I have some conversations on, okay, well, how do we translate that to what we're doing?
yeah, yeah. And has that been any? I mean, I don't know if that's impacted you the same way or not, but sometimes we'll have entrepreneurs that are female entrepreneurs, and there are extra challenges that they maybe have because of not having the access to some things that others might. Does that impact either of you in any way? Like, does it make any difference that from a
Yeah,
female
so
entrepreneur?
yeah, it's funny. I mean, we talk about this. I talk about this with so many people here in New York. Like, oh, did you not get that promotion because you were female? Or maybe now it's beneficial because they have so many spots that they now need to fill and there's less, like, you could go down that conversation, but I don't think so. Like my original goal back when I graduated college, like why I got my CSCS, which is like a really recognized strength and conditioning specialist, was to actually work for like a professional sports team. It's like I wanted to be like the strength and conditioning coach for like the New England Patriots. Like that was what I wanted to do. And yeah, I do remember this was a long time ago thinking like I'm never going to get this because it's just a boys club. But now I don't feel disadvantaged in any way being like a female like athletic business at all.
Yeah. Jess, same experience for you?
Yeah, the majority of our clients are female, certainly not all of them, but I'd say maybe 65, 70%.
Yep.
And I one International Women's Day, I posted like Happy International Women's Day, like cheers to everybody who works with us because we're females, or in spite of being females and doesn't shy away, something like that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if that's a disqualifier for male athletes, if they prefer or trust a male better, and if they prefer it, that's no problem. But I hope that doesn't undermine our capabilities. And one of our male clients wrote back and he was like, "What? That never crossed my mind." So that was kind of a boost because you always wonder.
Yeah, for sure.
Since it's just us, like we don't really we're just doing our thing. So I don't feel disadvantaged in that way. I also work like I'm a university track and field and cross country coach at the University of Calgary. And it's interesting to see coaches working together because we don't work with anyone. It's interesting to see the dynamics in a room where people are having a meeting or who knows who. I think that would be more similar to the corporate world, I would assume. And so what I'm saying is that there are still some levels of misogyny in sport, but not in our world, which is nice.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. I think undeniably that's there. So thank you for sharing that. So maybe one thing that we ask every guest that comes on is just a couple of takeaways for people, and there will be lots of people that I know are going to look at kind of at what you guys do because they are wanting to achieve the pinnacle of their sport, and we'll be trying to do that over the next little while. But there's lots of people who are listening that are maybe that A-type personality, but is a entrepreneur or similar to what you were talking about, Faye, with your husband, that it's like, okay, I'm not prioritizing this right now and realizing, you know what, I probably should prioritize doing these things. Do you have a couple of ideas as to, if people want to move kind of quickly into maybe getting more of a fitness and wellness routine that they've maybe strayed away from for a while? Do you have a couple of things that they could do to kind of jumpstart that? I don't know who wants to do it.
Yeah, I love what Jessica said. I don't know how she put this. She's like basically just being realistic with your goals. And to elaborate on that, I think being realistic about what you're willing to do for your goals. I think that's like so important because I think a lot of people are unsuccessful in fitness and their wellness routine because they one day get so excited and they like get out their Google Calendar and they're like, I'm gonna, schedule all these fitness classes and I'm gonna run X amount of miles a week, and they just aren't successful because it's just too much, and then they fail, and then they have a hard time picking it up because it's like every time you think, oh, I'm going to try this again, you remember last time I failed. So I think the key is to just really like when I started to write a fitness routine for myself after having a baby, like I wrote like 10 different fitness plans, and what they were coming to is realizing this isn't realistic. I need that. I can't do all this. I got to get rid of this. I got to get rid of that. So you just have to know how much time that you actually have or want to dedicate, knowing that you need to do some physical activity, most days a week, but being realistic about how much time do you actually have and when that's going to happen and where during the week and all that stuff. It's just really important to sort of set you on the right foot.
Yeah, kind of what's the trade-off and sacrifice you have to make to do one or the other, and how do you incorporate those together?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think one
last
thing I'll say on that is a lot of times if you're going to add something to your life that you think has value, you have to take away something in your life. And that's the hard part is, okay, so you want to add an extra hour of day. Okay, well, what are you going to take away? Unless you have tons of just leisure time where you're just not doing much. But usually it's like, well, I'm going to have to sacrifice that 1 hour of TV I watch with my husband. And then you have to make the decision. And I think that's the hard part for people, is realizing that, you know, there are trade-offs to everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting stuff. And a lot of people, I think, try to just overload it the other way, especially if they're jumping back into something, right? And Jess, anything from your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think creating routine is really important, making it a no-brainer. So you always do your training or your exercise in the morning or at lunch or in the afternoon, but trying to stay consistent so then it's not as much of a choice. Gamifying it is so effective. So setting a realistic goal, like completing the rings on your Apple Watch every day, or getting a streak on Strava or something like that is really, really motivating.
Yeah.
And I think a really important thing for people, especially type A people, to wrap their heads around is something is better than nothing. So if you're the sort of person that if you can't do it all the way, then you think there's no point in doing it, that's not correct. Like, that's not realistic and that's not real life. Anything is better than doing nothing.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to say it, because I think a lot of people, you're right, is if I can't fit it in today, then I just won't do it. And you know, but even just little chunks of time throughout the day, if you can even do that, that's better than not doing anything. And you know, but I think a lot of people, you're right, are so driven by the end goal when they're that type of personality that it's, if I can't achieve it, then you know, I'm not going to start it. So interesting stuff. So you know, what if people, I mean, they've heard bits and pieces about this today, and obviously I think we'll want to tap into finding out more about your programs and how that works and all of those things. What are the best ways of being able to follow what you're doing, and also you know, check out Grit and some of the different packages that are available there?
Gritcoaching.net. That's our website. We also are on Instagram at grit_coaching. We post lots of training tips, athlete highlights, that sort of thing. And we have a podcast. It's called the Nitty Gritty Training Podcast. It's on all the platforms.
Yeah. Well, what we'll do as well is we'll put all those in the show notes. So we'll have all of them in there. Check out the podcast, check out all of the other stuff as well. And, you know, and make sure that that you follow some of the information on there, because it's really great information that's there for people, regardless of how much they tap into it. There's some really good stuff on the podcast too. I've listened to a couple of them myself. So
thank you.
great. Well, again, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you both have very busy days, but really appreciate you sharing with us today and sharing some of the great information that you have as well. Hopefully people will check that out. To anybody listening as well, if you haven't hit subscribe in the podcast, do that now. We have great people every week, just like you two. But again, thanks very much for taking the time with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thanks again. And to everybody else, we will talk again soon on Big Idea, Big Moves.